Hi everyone. This is Phil Travis, your history professor, and I just wanted to do this. Shouldn't be too long, but I wanted to do a brief presentation on paper writing. We have a paper coming up for you guys. We have this is a 400 level class, so the paper is due at the end of the term, the end of week 10, I think is where it's scheduled. I'll have to double check on that, but it's due at the end of the term. But we have a paper proposal that's coming due week 6, and so we're in week 4 right now. So we really need to be selecting topics right now and doing some preliminary things for the paper proposal. So this little presentation, I hope, will give you guys some insight on what I expect on the paper and what I expect also on the paper proposals. So the first and most foremost piece of direction for any paper course is follow the directions, and I know that that sounds kind of obvious, but you would be amazed at how many people lose points for not simply following the directions clearly. So it's the easiest way to save yourself some points. Um, this paper should be 6 to 9 pages. Do not go under length, but a certain degree of overlength is acceptable. When I say a certain degree of overlength, that means if you give me 10.5 pages, then that's great. But do not give me 20 pages. Part of this exercise is, following the parameters that are, asked of you. And so, do not give me 20 pages, give me 6 to 9 pages. And if it's 10 and a half, if it's 11, that's fine. But don't go excessively over. Never go under length. If you go under length, then it tells me that you really didn't give the paper your full effort because we're going to be talking about you're going to be writing about some major historical topics that certainly warrant discussion of more than, you know, 5 pages. So make sure you're within there. All papers should be double spaced and they should be in font 12, New Times Roman. And of course, you'll submit them as you will the paper proposal, and everything else will be submitted on Canvas to our assignment box. All papers should be written in paragraph form. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And you need to cite. Do not plagiarize. Um, we're 400 level here, so everybody knows what plagiarism is. So I don't need to go into some long explanation of this. Just remember to cite the information that you obtain, not just direct quotes, but also you need to cite if you're paraphrasing information from sources. You have to cite the material that is either not common knowledge or not your own idea. Um, Plagiarizing is, of course, stealing the ideas of somebody else, so don't do that. So when in doubt, cite. Cite frequently. It's better to cite frequently than to cite infrequently. If you only use one source in a paragraph, okay, you've got a paragraph and there's only one source used, then you only need to put the citation at the end of the paragraph. If you have multiple sources in the paragraph, then you need to cite at the end of each sentence that you're using the different source. But if you only use one source in the paragraph, just put it at the end of the paragraph. I want you to use Chicago Manual of Style. You can go online and they have they have a free version that everybody can look at online. Um, I want you to use either footnotes or endnotes. I don't really care, though, to be honest with you. My preference is for footnotes. I understand that some people prefer endnotes. I personally prefer footnotes because it's easier for me to see what sources you're using at different parts of the paper. Um, so I prefer footnotes, but you can use endnotes if you like. Also, make sure you have a bibliography. I have a paper proposal like template guide that is in the Canvas area, and see that I have examples of most of the common types of citations. So if you go in there, you can see exactly what the citation of a book is supposed to look like. For example, I have books, newspapers, or journal articles, these types of examples in there. If you have to cite something that is, a primary source from an archive, um, I will be obviously lenient on terms of how you cite it, as long as you have the basic information there. So if you cited something from like a research archive that you went to, say it was a person's papers, then you would cite the person's papers, you would cite the box numbers, the folder numbers, whatever it is that the item was contained in, and then you will cite the location of the collection. All papers should be written in paragraph form. I don't need to, belabor this too much. We are all upper division students here, and so we all know how to do this. But I do want, everyone to know that, I expect to write a good paper. I expect it not only written in paragraph form, but there's a way to do, like, for example, an introduction. The introduction of a paper is arguably the most important part of the paper. I mean, obviously the evidence you provide is important too, but the introduction is the first thing that the reader comes across, and it's where you either get or you lose the reader. And so work on all aspects of the paper, but work on writing a introduction that's able to draw the reader in. Usually the best introductions, when you start getting up into longer papers and eventually into like article length type works, you oftentimes have introductions that are more than one paragraph long. For a paper like this, I would recommend having a 2-paragraph introduction. You would have an introductory paragraph. The first one will be like your hook, and the hook is where you draw the reader in. Generally, the hook is a kind of vivid narrative image. Maybe if you were talking about World War I, you would give like maybe a first-hand account of a soldier experiencing the trenches on the Western Front. So you have like a narrative account that kind of draws the reader in. And then the second paragraph is where you establish the argument. What are you going to argue in the paper? What are you going to look at? What types of sources are you going to use? What's the overall point? Have a thesis statement. Very important to have an overall point. I don't want to see papers where you just summarize stuff. I want to see arguments. You don't have to worry about reinventing the wheel. You don't have to worry about, has this ever been argued before, because those are, finding a topic that's original is one of the hardest things historians do in some cases. So just don't worry about that, but just you need to make a clear and concise argument. The body of the paper, of course, is where you provide the evidence, and the conclusion is where you summarize the paper. So paragraph form. Every paragraph should contain an idea that connects to the argument. You want to carry the argument through the paper, and so each paragraph should possess an argument that kind of relates to the central, or a point that relates to the central argument. Avoid long paragraphs. Most paragraphs can be broken up into smaller paragraphs. Typical paragraphs are like a half a page long, 3/4 of a page long. If you have a paragraph that's over a page long, it's almost always too long, and you can look in there and you can see where you can break it up because you're shifting ideas. Okay? So as you go to a new idea, new paragraph. All right. Last slide, source usage. I want a minimum of 5 sources on this paper, and I want to see those sources demonstrated as used in the paper. So, don't write me a paper where you're only citing 2 sources and then you list 5 sources at the end, because there's no evidence you've actually used those other sources. I want demonstrated use of these sources in the paper. I want academic materials. I want monographs, articles, and of course, if you can use primary sources, that's fine. I love primary sources, of course. First-hand accounts are fantastic. If you have access to pertinent newspaper articles, which of course your library, I think we get New York Times Historical, but you can access newspaper articles. They can sometimes be valuable primary sources. If you have other accesses to primary sources, I highly encourage those. But you don't have to use primary sources on this paper. I'm fine if you use a series of academic materials such as monographs and journal articles. A monograph is a book written by a historian. You can use one of the class textbooks. I mean, you can use all of the class textbooks, but only one of them will count as a separate source, so you'll still need 4 others that are outside of class. You should take a look at your library website. They have great electronic databases, so you can go into the library website and pull up depending on the topic, be able to pull up quite a few different uh, different journal articles written by scholars on the particular subject matter. I want, uh, I want works by scholars. I don't want pop culture history stuff. I want stuff written by scholars and academics. If you go to your library, there'll be numerous books that pertain to the topic. If you go to the library's electronic databases, you can access electronic journal articles, electronic books, and so forth. So that's what I'm looking for in terms of sources. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. And if anybody has any questions, um, ask me. I'll have another open office hours session next week on Thursday. So if you have any further questions, just ask me. Thanks, guys.